Many years ago, the sun beat down on an ordinary farmer plowing his field. Suddenly, a young boy ran up to the farmer and told him that enemy armies were quickly advancing. The boy had come bearing a message from the farmer's countrymen, who were asking him to come and lead the army. Immediately, the farmer left his plow standing in the field and set out to answer their call. Within 16 days, the farmer had led his troops to victory. After completing this great act of public service, the farmer chose to surrender power and return to his plow. He was content that the Roman Empire was at peace. If you had been that farmer, would you have done the same? To those living centuries after him, Lucius Cincinnatus was known as a role model of civic virtue. In fact, George Washington expressed his belief that Cincinnatus exemplified the good citizen, someone who chooses to serve the common good. And as head of our Constitutional Convention, Washington also knew that our Constitution requires modern-day Cincinnatuses. Our Constitution depends upon civic virtue. President and founding father John Adams once declared, quote, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other," end quote. Adams was not claiming that every citizen must subscribe to one state religion. Instead, Adams was claiming that the strength of our Constitution depends upon the civic virtue of the people. Adams knew what we seem to have forgotten, that only a virtuous people can self-govern effectively. Today, we will learn what civic virtue is and how our Constitution was built on civic virtue. We will then see the desperate state of civic virtue today and how changes must be made to preserve the precious liberties our Constitution protects for every American. The John Adams Academy explains that, quote, "Virtue is an inner commitment and voluntary outward obedience to principles of truth and moral law," end quote. A virtuous individual is disposed to make moral choices. Civic virtue is that same disposition when it comes to the common good. Civic virtue requires a citizen to put the needs of the community over their own, just as Cincinnatus did when he left his plow. When we strive for civic virtue, we also care about fulfilling our civic duties, such as voting, jury duty, and community involvement. The virtuous citizen is honest, law-abiding, and an active political participant. If at its basic level, civic virtue is prioritizing the common good, we should next be asking ourselves why our Constitution depends upon it. If our Constitution is the visible foundation of our country, civic virtue is its invisible substructure. Our Constitution was made for good citizens who care about their government and work to preserve it. But if a populace stops caring about being a good citizen, our constitutional system will fall apart. This was something our founding fathers had in mind when drafting the Constitution. As Professor David Brooks writes, quote, "America's founding fathers studied the history of democracies going back to ancient Greece. They drew the lesson that democracies can be quite fragile. When private virtue fails, the constitutional order crumbles," end quote. The founders realized that the ancient democracies shared a common trait. All of them had fallen. And the reason they fell was because of a dereliction of civic virtue in the people. This caused our founders to take a different approach, creating a new form of government distinct from the ancient democracies, but one that would succeed where they had failed. The end product was a document that completely depends upon civic virtue. John Adams wrote in a letter in 1776 that, quote, "The only foundation of a free constitution is pure virtue. And if this cannot be inspired into our people in a greater measure than they have it now, they may change their rulers and the forms of government. But they will not obtain a lasting liberty. They will only exchange tyrants and tyrannies," end quote. Without civic virtue, our constitutional government will fall just like the ancient democracies. Because of this, any limitation on the ability of a good citizen to act virtuously is an attack on our Constitution. George Washington was often referred to as the modern-day Cincinnatus, for he had also abandoned his plow to lead our new nation. Washington warned of the danger of attacks on civic virtue when he wrote in his farewell address, quote, "It is substantially true that virtue is a necessary spring of popular government. Who that is a sincere friend to it can look with indifference upon attempts to shake the foundation of the fabric," end quote. A lack of civic virtue shakes the foundation of our country. If we lose our virtuous citizenry, our Constitution will lose its substructure. We now understand civic virtue and that our Constitution was built upon it. But what is the condition of this substructure today? The unfortunate reality is that civic virtue is rarely talked about, much less fostered. This has resulted in a lack of trust in America. In 2019, the Pew Research Center asked Americans about their level of confidence that other citizens would fulfill their civic duties. The survey found that a majority of American adults do not expect others to cast an informed vote and do not trust that other Americans are capable of holding civil conversations with people of different views. As a result, our Constitution is at risk of losing its impact. The checks and balances built into our system of government will no longer function if the people do not care enough to enforce them. Our American experiment is in danger of failing for the same reason as the ancient democracies that came before it. However, each of us has the power to strengthen our Constitution and maintain its substructure by striving for civic virtue. So, what steps can we take to do so? First, we must teach our nation what civic virtue is. This will help to instill in the minds of young Americans what it means to be a good citizen. Second, we must individually strive for civic virtue. That way, we can teach it to our children, see it at play in our community, and reap the benefits of it as a nation. Both of these steps, teaching about civic virtue and striving for it ourselves, must take place at the most local level, in our families and communities. As Professor of Law David Brooks writes, quote, "Responsibility for inculcating civic virtue rests with families, schools, and other institutions of civic society," end quote. If we wish to rule ourselves, we have the responsibility to rule well. We can only do that by focusing less on our own desires and more on how we can serve the common good. We must be willing to lay down our own plow, just like Cincinnatus, and come to our country's aid. Because every citizen, no matter their race, gender, or religion, has the constitutional right to a trial by jury. Every citizen deserves to be led by a public servant who is elected by an informed populace. And every citizen should have the ability to engage in civil conversation with people who disagree with them. Each of us has the duty to stand up for these liberties by striving for civic virtue. Only then will our constitutional freedoms truly be protected. The first time I heard the story of Cincinnatus, I was sitting in my mom's lap in her rocking chair while she read to me from the Book of Virtues. I hope for the day when I can hold my own little girl and read her those same stories. At its simplest, this is what our Constitution was built upon. We must hunt history for stories of civic virtue and tell them to our children. But not only that, we must also model these civic virtues ourselves. Our lives should be a powerful example of care for and service to our community, thereby helping to preserve the precious constitutional rights of all Americans. The civic virtue of Cincinnatus inspired George Washington to lead our new nation. Just imagine what our civic virtue could do for America.